Hello and welcome back to The Path, the podcast from Lifestyle RX. Joining me today is Brendan Byrne, as always. How are you doing today?
Hey, Dan. It's great. It's sunny today, so I'm happy.
It's finally getting to some of the spring weather. It's much nicer than it has been in a while. So, all right. So today we're going to talk about a topic. We're actually going to steal some thunder from another announcement that'll be coming up soon, but we're getting close to launching our monthly maintenance program. So after the 12-week program, we'll have a series of monthly maintenance programs. We'll get into details about that later. But the first topic of that is going to be exercise progression. So that's actually what we're going to talk about in today's podcast. So I guess maybe the first thing to start with might be a bit of a review from other episodes, but what is the role that muscles play in type 2 diabetes, and how does that crucial? And we're talking about doing our reversal program.
Yeah, so there are some pretty famous diabetes researchers that believe that the whole problem in type 2 diabetes of insulin resistance begins in the muscle. And so your muscle is where your carbohydrates want to end up. So when you eat, you break down carbohydrates into glucose, and 80 to 90% of that should end up in your muscles, provided you're active and provided your muscles are healthy. If you're not active, or if your muscles are not healthy for any reason, then that glucose can't be stored in the muscle, and it goes to the liver, where some of it can be stored, but a lot of it will get turned into fat. And you start getting into this process where you start creating fat from carbohydrates and shipping that fat around your body. And so that kind of protection, so in many respects, your muscles have this protective factor to your liver in terms of protecting them from those carbs coming their way. But the lack of that, really is kind of one of the first things that starts to fail. And often we're talking 10, 15 years ahead of developing type 2 diabetes. So when you think of that, obviously there's a key role that they have to play in the reversal, right? And so if we can get them to perform their function, then we can start to make steps in the right direction.
Yeah, and I know we've mentioned before that they play an especially key role in the post-meal period on blood sugar levels, right? How does that exactly?
Yeah, so that's really building on that is the destination for that's where you want the glucose from the carbohydrates to end up. And so in the post-meal period, if you're sedentary, you're just going to rely on insulin to get the glucose into the muscle. And this is where we kind of introduce this little kind of secret, right? Which is, if you get up and move and go for a walk, just move the muscles, the actual movement of the muscle will get glucose into the muscle without insulin. And so it is a way to kind of bypass that insulin resistance problem that we have in muscles. And so this is kind of one of the key things that you can actually do right away. And so you don't have to kind of wait till your muscles get healthy from all the work you're doing. You can actually start by getting out and walking, and after a meal, you'll see, if you're wearing a continuous glucose monitor, you'll see your glucose come down. And then the neat part about this is that actually is what makes your muscles healthier and does get rid of insulin resistance in the muscles. So it really helps both of them. And so, and again, kind of if we can get the glucose into the muscle and not going to the liver, where it protects it from turning into fat in the liver.
Awesome. And then in terms of long-term health benefits, how does the regular exercise impact the risk of developing type 2 diabetes or other chronic diseases?
Yeah. So when you look at the total effects of exercise, it's unbelievable, right? And we've got a slide on this where we kind of go all the way around kind of a screen. It's kind of the premise is the miracle pill, right? Like if you had one pill that did all these things, it would be a miracle. But we do have one intervention, which is exercise. So it reduces type 2 diabetes by 27% in some studies. It lowers all-cause mortality by about 30%, right? So If you if you were going to do one thing to live a long and healthy life, exercise is a pretty good one thing to do. Now, of course, it's not the only thing. And then you see this risk in terms of breast cancer, cardiovascular disease, other types of cancer, arthritis, and heart disease, right? Like it just has so many benefits across the board. And so, you really can't underemphasize the health benefits of regular exercise.
Sure. And then we talk about this concept of like the metabolic engine and how muscles kind of contribute to that energy expenditure and fat burning and stuff. How did those all link together?
Yeah, so muscles are your largest metabolic engine in that they can, your muscles can burn more than any other organ. Provided you're active, you can also burn. Might not be, if you're sedentary, you're not going to be using much in your muscles, but so your muscles have this potential of being kind of the big driver of kind of metabolism. And so metabolism is what we do with food. One of the things we do with food is we use energy. What's really fascinating, and I will detail this in the presentation that's going to come within the monthly group, is just this notion that we used to really think that if we go out for a run or do some exercise and quote unquote burn 1,000 calories, we used to think that, well, that's 1,000 extra calories, right? So, so if our base metabolism and normal activity is 2,500, and we go to 1,000 calories of exercise, we're gonna add, we can eat another 1,000 calories. Turns out it's not quite true. Our bodies will burn pretty much the same amount of energy every day. It's this constrained energy theory. And so the thing about the metabolic engine isn't that you can burn more calories to eat more. It's that you burn more calories doing exercise, which allows you to turn off a bunch of things that may not be that helpful. And one of the things that's not that helpful is chronic inflammation. We've talked about that in a previous episode. So exercise can reduce chronic inflammation. And guess what? Chronic inflammation causes some degree of insulin resistance. So some of the insulin resistance people are facing is because their immune system is activated and they've got this chronic inflammation. Exercise can have an immediate effect on that. Exercise also dampens the stress response. And so what you see there is basically you just, and you kind of feel it sometimes. Like if you've exercised during a day, you just don't get ruffled by the same things as if you don't exercise. I really notice it after about 4 or 5 days. If I haven't exercised, you could like my trigger is, it's like hair trigger. You could just, anything bugs me. Whereas when I'm exercising all the time, it's like, big things happen and I'm kind of like, okay, I don't, and I always thought that was just purely psychological. But it turns out you can actually measure the stress response in people when they've been exercising and when they're not exercising. And they did a study, I think I've mentioned this one before, but public speaking, people that get scared of public speaking. And lo and behold, you see that the stress response is different. The amount of adrenaline and cortisol released is less if you're exercising. So this metabolic engine really allows the energy to be, used on something that's good for the muscles. And it dampens down some of these things that you might be using energy on that aren't going to be that helpful. The third kind of category in things that get reduced, and this one's going to sound weird, but you actually have less energy available for reproduction. So most of us aren't always thinking about reproduction, but what that actually means in practical terms is it dampens down a little bit of this sex hormone levels and the sex hormone effect, which seems to have it seems to be very protective in terms of cancers related to basically sex hormones. And so it's one of the reasons why exercise has a profound effect on certain types of cancer. And I think it's just that it tunes this down a little bit. When you look at it from an evolutionary perspective, we evolved into the hunter-gatherer lifestyle. That was kind of like 200,000 years ago up to about 15,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago. That was what humans did. It was a very active lifestyle. And so you could kind of think in that lifestyle, humans kind of the expectation that your physiology expects you to be burning about 1,000 or 1,500 calories just doing stuff. Yeah. So the sedentary stuff is what's different. And so really kind of when you look at it, it's kind of like, our normal balance is we've got that much exercise, which leaves a little bit there for inflammation if we need it, and a little bit there for, reproduction, and a little bit there for stress response. But, when you take away that kind of exercise component of energy expenditure, those other things kind of run amok a bit. And that's a big part, those are big drivers of so many of those other chronic diseases. So when we go back to kind of think about like these benefits from exercise, I think a lot of the benefits actually come from this fact that you're using energy in a way that you're kind of designed to use energy, and you're not using it on these things that may be counterproductive for you right now.
Well, and then I guess, so how should you approach like starting to exercise or building up your exercise intensity? Because obviously you don't want to jump in and start running a marathon tomorrow. What's the actual, like, what's the best way to kind of work that up and start exercising more?
So I think the habit of daily exercise is just something that's really important to get to. And so we talk about it and start with frequency. Do something every day, right?
Mm-hmm.
That something can be really small. That something can be, maybe it doesn't even feel like a workout. Maybe it's just something that you get out and do and you move your body. But hold yourself to that minimum, right? Like just set a minimum. And I've been talking to a bunch of patients this week about this, and kind of the thing of, you don't even need to tell me what the minimum is, right? Like it's not about kind of external kind of validation. It's just something that you do that gets you out the door. Because the neat part of setting a minimum is that you rarely will do the minimum, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the only time you'll do the minimum is when you're not feeling well, right? So, and you'll still feel better for getting out and doing something. So the habit of daily exercise, I think, is really important. As you do that, you then will find that you start to really naturally kind of increase the duration. And so I kind of like to see that build. And I like people to get to kind of 150 to 300 minutes. I mean, ideally 300 minutes, almost an hour a day of some activity. And I don't care about the intensity at all, right? Like I just, it doesn't need to be intense. It can just be, like a brisk walk would, for many people, that'd just be awesome, right?
Yeah.
Again, what's neat about that is, though, you do that for a few months and you'll actually start to feel like you kind of want to, you want to do more. And that's where it's fun to explore intensity. And, we talk about it obviously in the program around resistance exercise. And we'll talk a little bit about kind of how to progress aerobic exercise as well.
Awesome. And then you kind of touched on this a little bit, but the importance of like making your exercise a daily habit. Like, why is it so important that you do that consistently every day, that minimum, like you talked about? Like, what's the reason for that?
Yeah, so I think partly it's that you want to be expending some of the energy there, and then I think the other piece, especially in the context of our programs, is we want to make sure that the muscles are really good at burning fat. And so when kind of a healthy muscle at a light intensity will burn fat. And what happens in type 2 diabetes is that muscles lose the ability to burn fat. And so they're just not very good at it. So part of it's just kind of getting there and helping the muscles to learn to burn fat. You have to be able to burn fat in order to be able to lose fat. And clearly insulin resistance is, there is a component that we have to lose. We have to lose fat to do that. So it's really kind of getting that metabolic engine, every day burning a little bit of fat. It pairs really well with sleep, which and the fasting period, kind of the metabolic switch that we talk about, where kind of the natural circadian rhythm has you fat burning at night. That's why we do the time restricted eating, right? So that you get every night you get fat burning. And then if you can do exercise every day, you get your muscles to be getting a little bit better at burning fat. And so that's where kind of it's so powerful to be sure that you're doing something daily.
And then, so doing this, like the exercise over time every day and increasing it, how does that actually impact like your aerobic capacity and your muscle strength? And how does that work?
Yeah. So one of the things that you notice right away is you actually just feel like you're fitter, right? You feel like you have more energy. You feel like you have more endurance. You don't get winded from walking up the stairs. It just feels better, and that's your aerobic capacity. It's just what you can do with the oxygen you breathe is a lot more, right? When you look at the aerobic capacity of like world-class marathoners, they literally can run 5-minute miles without burning any of the carbohydrates. So just purely on the kind of that base level of fat burning, they're running these phenomenal efforts. For most of us, that's not in the cards, but you can get to the place where you're, just your daily actions, the things that you do, just simply don't tire you, because your muscles are so good at burning fat. We've got lots of fat for fuel on board. Even when we're lean, we've got weeks of fat on board. So it's just such a great stable food, great stable energy source that you feel good. And then you improve this thing called VO2 max, which VO2 max is basically it's a metric that kind of measures the volume of oxygen that your body's maximally able to consume. It's kind of an interesting measure of fitness, because it's been studied a lot, and it correlates really, really well with longevity, and correlates with all the benefits of exercise. It's not that useful though day to day for us in terms of like what we do. It's kind of an interesting thing to know. You can do specific exercises to improve that. But really kind of from a fitness perspective, I kind of look at it as being, it's just a signpost along the way. And so if you have one of these watches like I do that tells you your VO2 max is, it's nice to see it go up, and it tells you the right things. But there's no kind of particular number that I'm going to be, harping at you for. You're going to notice that from just how you feel. And that's going to be the big thing. The other thing that's so key here though is muscles aren't static, right? Like your muscles today, aren't your muscles in a year's time. So in a year's time, if you're active and you're exercising, you can have, bigger muscles that actually use more energy at rest, which is great. You can have stronger muscles. You can have muscles with more mitochondria in it that are just like healthier in all respects. Or you can have muscles that are smaller and diminished because you didn't do anything, right? So your muscles are very dynamic, and that applies at all ages, right? So sometimes we're like, okay, older people can't gain muscle. It's simply not true. It's harder. That is true. It definitely is harder, but you can gain muscle at any age. And so, what we want to do is get that better muscular health. I've said this before, and I really kind of believe it in terms of everything I see in my practice with people achieving kind of long-term remission. I think long-term remission comes when your muscles are like fully restored back to that kind of, full metabolic health. So I think that, when you kind of look at that, kind of improving the strength and the mass and the endurance of the muscle is going to be very, very helpful from the standpoint of your type 2 diabetes. The other thing is just as you think about getting older, your muscles are what allows you to not fall, not be frail. And I think that not having muscle when we're 90 years old is probably one of the bigger problems that we see. So I get excited for people in this program because they're doing all these changes, but they have like years to progress on the muscular side. So there's really no ceiling to it.
Yeah, awesome. And then if we're talking about like resistance training in particular, what are some like key components of that you should make sure you're taking into account for to make sure it's effective?
Yeah, so we kind of throw that in week 11, and the idea there is kind of after a couple of months of increasing your duration, you're ready for some intensity, and resistance exercise is intense, right? Like it kind of hurts a little bit, and so really keeping it simple. It's use all the major muscle groups, right? So you want to kind of use your kind of arms and chest, your legs, your back, and your core. And so if we break that down, we can kind of think of doing a push, a pull, and legs and core, kind of four categories of exercise. Do a couple of different exercises in each of those four, and that's a pretty good beginning workout. And you can do body weights, you can do with weights, you can do it with machines, you can do it with bands. There's all sorts of ways to do that. And what's nice with that is you get, bigger effects in terms of, increasing muscle size, right? From lifting, from the resistance exercise. You generally, when you're doing the resistance exercise, you're going to use some of the glycogen or stored carbohydrate in the muscle, which creates more room so that when you have your meal afterwards, you might see that you're able to tolerate more of those good yellow like carbs than you were if you didn't. And then you're also going to strengthen and make more healthy the mitochondria in the muscle. So you're going to increase the number of mitochondria, and you're going to improve the health of those mitochondria, which will allow your resting metabolic rate to go up. But it also just, you will notice you just have more energy because of that. Your little powerhouses in your muscles are going to do a lot better.
Cool. And then sometimes you hear people talk about like high intensity workout training, or like I think it's called like HIIT or something. Like, is that something that that like you should be looking at, and like how do you incorporate rest periods with that, and what's the right way to do something like that?
Yeah. So once you start adding intensity, you need recovery, right? So the nice part about aerobic exercise that we started with was you kind of can do the same thing every day, right? Because you're really not stressing the muscles all that much. You're getting them better at fat burning, but it really isn't a lot of stress there. When you do a resistance exercise, you actually get a little bit of damage to the muscle. That's actually what makes the muscle stronger. So you get these kind of little micro tears in the muscle, and a little bit of damage. And then the muscle heals and gets stronger. And so you kind of want 48 hours between, exercises on the same muscle group. So you need to structure that into your week for sure. And then you get, when we look at aerobic progression, we start to go into kind of zones that different training zones. So if we look at kind of a 5-zone training system, zone 1 and zone 2 would be our aerobic zones. And zone 2 is kind of like our max fat burning aerobic zone. And so you'll hear a lot about zone 2 exercise and people kind of prioritizing zone 2 exercise. It really is just kind of prioritizing that aerobic base. Zone 3 basically goes from you basically start to call up the carbohydrate you use in the muscle, right? So fat is a great fuel, but it's slow. So your mitochondria have to be very efficient. And if your mitochondria aren't so efficient, or you don't have that many mitochondria, you just at a certain point, you can't rely purely on fat because it's just too slow to get the energy out of it. So your muscles will start to use carbohydrate, which is a faster fuel. And it's a little bit faster to go through kind of the full cycle, but it's also faster in that it's got this shortcut cycle that's anaerobic, and meaning you don't need oxygen delivery to the muscle to use this. And so in zone 3, what happens is you basically start to switch over from fat burning into carb burning. And at the upper end of zone 3, basically the distinction between zone 3 and zone 4 is your lactate threshold. And this is where you're now exercising. So lactate is what gets produced when you don't have oxygen for glucose. And so you basically can produce energy super quickly, albeit not very much, right? Like, so if you take glucose through, like if you take a molecule of glucose through its full cycle of oxidative phosphorylation, kind of the full aerobic cycle, you'll get about 32 ATP out of it. So ATP is it's like the little unit of energy our body uses. You only get 2 from glycolysis, where you produce lactate. So it's a huge compromise in terms of the amount of energy, but it's fast, right? And so the zone 3, zone 4 differentiation ends up being, it's the place where the lactate now starts to, you're producing it too fast, and so it starts to just build up. You feel that, it's that burning feeling in the muscles. It's, people describe it as, the muscles screaming. Or when I used to run the 400 meters in high school, it was the bear. It was like there was a bear on your back just coming down on you and slowing everything down. That's lactic acid. So you've crossed that threshold. So when we look at that from the training systems, zone 3 is actually not a very good zone to train in. The upper end of zone 3, right at that threshold, is actually a sweet spot, because you know what you train there is the ability for your muscles to take that lactate and recycle it, because lactate can go, you know, lactate gets produced very quickly, but it also can go through the full cycle, so you get the extra 30 ATP out of it. And so you train that zone, and that makes you, you start to notice that you can go faster at the same intensity. And what happens is you push your lactate threshold up.
Yeah.
And so that's a useful zone to train. It's not quite high intensity. So generally we call those like tempo workouts or threshold workouts. And they're interesting because they're kind of, the intensity is like a 7 or an 8. Like you're going, but if I was on the treadmill and we were talking, I'd still be able to talk to you. I would be answering in 1 or 2, word sentences. I'd be breathing pretty hard, but I wouldn't be ignoring you. Whereas when you go to high intensity, you're almost all out, right? You're like an 8 or a 9. There's no talking in high intensity, right? You're just going as hard as you can. You're often doing it for 30 or maybe 60 seconds at the most. And then you get a recovery from it. The higher intensity exercise really pushes up your VO2 max. It actually really does lift your that top end of your fitness up, and it really helps in terms of delivery of oxygen. You start to build better pipes to get the oxygen to the muscles. So it has a role to play, right? These upper zones, kind of the lactate training or the high intensity training, has a role to play. But for most of the people in our program, it would be something I'd be kind of thinking like, if you let's say you come into the program and you really haven't been exercising, and you kind of follow through kind of what we're talking about, and you get up to 300 minutes of aerobic exercise, kind of by the end of the second month, adding in the resistance exercise, I would say almost another year of that. And then starting to add some of the higher intensity stuff and just do it really slowly. So you'd tend to do, if you were going to do this, you'd tend to do maybe 1 threshold workout a week and maybe 1 high intensity workout a week. The biggest danger with them is that you get injured, right? Because you're going at a higher intensity, and injury kind of screws up everything, right? You all of a sudden are kind of forced into a sedentary kind of position. So, and especially the older we get, the more that avoiding injury is actually the smart plan, right? So, like kind of all aspects of our advice on exercise, it's like, be consistent, but go slow, right? Just progress it slowly. Leave something in the tank. You're better off to be kind of 20% under kind of your maximum than to be kind of redlining it at your maximum. Yeah,
for sure. And then, so if you are at that point where you want to incorporate some of the higher intensity stuff, what's the best way to do that? Like, if you're doing running, cycling, rowing, like examples like that, what are the kind of best ways to integrate that?
Yeah. So with running, there's a thing called a tempo run, and often it's kind of the pace that for people that are runners, it'd be kind of the pace that they think about kind of going into a 10K road race or a half marathon. So it's pretty hard. But you do it for about 20 minutes, and that'll feel like a challenge for you to do, right? And so it's just upping that intensity a little bit. And again, with running, what we're trying to do is avoid that zone 3 where you're going kind of too fast for really to maximize your aerobic potential, but too slow to kind of maximize your lactate threshold. So so kind of this 20-minute, like kind of as hard as you can go for 20 minutes. Well, it'll feel kind of like that. It won't feel so, you kind of have to pace yourself. The first third, you kind of have to feel like you're going a bit slower than you think you should be going. The middle third, you'll feel like you're about right. And then the last third, you'll be like, okay, this is really hard. I can't wait to finish this. So that's a good way to do it. And then, for the higher intensity stuff, you can do intervals, right? So, you can do 50 meter strides that are kind of at your higher intensity. For runners, you really want to make sure you have your form down well before you start doing that. So start with some easy strides and do that for weeks to months just to build up your form. and then eventually you can go all out. Cycling, kind of the tempo is a steady state ride. Usually with cycling, you can do it a little bit longer. It's not quite as intense from a muscular fatigue standpoint. And then the intervals, hills are great. And actually, I should say for running, hills are great too, right? Hills are kind of natural resistance. And it's kind of when people walk, I actually say, you know what, like hills and stairs are they're built-in resistance workouts. And then, rowing machines are great. You can kind of do that tempo rowing a long period, or you can do the intervals just the same. And I think a lot of people will find that they actually kind of don't really like doing running intervals, but they don't mind doing rowing or cycling intervals. So that's kind of a way to go.
Okay. And then this kind of following on to one of our recent episodes, but what's the importance of adequate protein intake when you're doing exercise and trying to increase your exercise?
Well, one thing, Dan, if we're nothing, we're repetitive. We're always repeating. So so muscles need protein, and we want in order to get the advantage of protein, we want to use your muscles. So the two go hand in hand, and so you really clearly need it. If you're breaking down the muscle at all, you're going to increase the amount of protein that you need. So the ranges that we give people, I think, are perfectly fine, right? That 30 to 50 grams of protein with each meal across 3 meals is probably going to have most people in the right place for it. So you don't really need to do anything special beyond that, but you do really want to be sure that you are getting that.
Mm-hmm.
If you're more muscular, it's more like 50 grams. If you're slighter, it's more like 30 grams. But you'll kind of want to be sure that you're getting that. And so, if you don't get that, then what'll happen is you obviously, you're breaking down your muscles and you're not necessarily repairing them. So you're going to be more likely to get injured, right? If you're doing these exercises and not doing that. Now, the great part with our human body is, generally speaking, you're going to feel like eating more protein. Like you're actually going to notice it. Like you're just going to and you'll notice it probably most dramatically kind of when you'll eat and you'll go back for a bigger portion. Right.
Mm.
And just watch that. Like it's just fascinating. The things that we think are conscious, right? We think we consciously choose our portion size. Like,
Yeah.
and you can kind of notice that, you start lifting weights and you haven't been doing it for a while, and you notice that if you just watch, you'll notice that your portion, let's say, my weekly salmon, it'd be like, oh, I'm taking a little bit bigger piece this week. My body telling me that I need it.
Yeah. All right. So I guess we're almost out of time. So any last thoughts or parting words for this topic?
Yeah, again, it's the drum beat here. Consistency is more important than intensity. I think that if you're going to write something down and put it by your running gear or your workout equipment, that's probably a good one to put there. It's really, really true especially kind of as we get older.
Mm-hmm.
Progress slowly. I've talked about that, but again, that one bears repeating, and it's worth kind of going over again. And it's in every category, right? So just because you've been exercising 300 minutes a week does not mean you can do all out sprints on the track the first time out, right? Just go slow, right? And give yourself time across every category. And then the last thing I think is really important is, we're big believers in teaching people to do stuff. But some of these things, especially when it comes to, exercise, guidance really helps, right? Like, all the top athletes have coaches, right? And these guys, so these people know a lot. They know more about sport and exercise than we'll ever know. And they have coaches. So, it's, if you can afford it, if it can fit into your life, getting some help from an exercise professional or some guidance there really, really is helpful. And it's a good way to kind of, it's a good way to avoid some things that you mistakes you don't have to make, right? I think that's the big thing. People are often like, am I going to get fitter faster? And it's like, maybe not, but you're probably going to avoid a lot of the mistakes that most of us have made along the way, right? And the biggest mistakes are the ones that lead to injury, because injuries are a real drag.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Well, thank you so much once again for all of your insight. And that was a great overview of stuff. So If you think anyone that would benefit from listening to this podcast, let them know by sharing the link. And if you'd like to sign up for the Lifestyle RX program, you can do that at lifestylrx.com. So thanks again, Brendan, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, Dan.